Good afternoon. Today, I want to talk about something that sounds academic, but is actually terrifyingly personal. A pattern that has destroyed empires, toppled governments, and wiped out the savings of billions of people throughout history. And we're watching it happen again, right now. What I'm talking about is the big debt cycle, a pattern that repeats roughly every 80 years. That's about one human lifetime, which is precisely why we never see it coming. Ray Dalio, one of the world's most successful investors, has spent over 50 years studying debt cycles across 500 years of history. He discovered something remarkable. Major debt crises occur roughly every 80 years, give or take 25 years. Why don't we recognize this pattern? Three reasons. First, it lasts about one lifetime. Think about it. If the last major crisis happened when your grandparents were young, you have no personal memory of it. The 2008 financial crisis? That's already fading from memory for most people. We're collectively forgetting the warning signs. Second, we're obsessed with the present. We focus on daily news, quarterly earnings, election cycles, not multi-decade trends that unfold slowly, like watching water erode stone. Third, we want to believe debt isn't a problem. Credit feels good. It lets us spend more than we earn, live beyond our means, fund our dreams today. And there have been so many false alarms about debt crises that never materialized, so we've learned to ignore the warnings. But here's the thing. Just because the pattern takes 80 years doesn't mean it won't arrive on schedule. The debt cycle is mechanistically simple, almost mathematical in its inevitability. When someone borrows money, they can spend more than they earn in the near term. This feels fantastic for individuals, for businesses, for governments. More spending means more growth, more jobs, more prosperity. But eventually, you have to pay it back. Principal plus interest. When that day comes, you must spend less than you earn. You're now constrained, pulling back, contracting the economy. This creates what Dalio calls short-term debt cycles. These last about 6 years, give or take 3. We call them business cycles, recessions, and recoveries. Economists understand these fairly well. But lurking beneath those waves is a much larger tide, the long-term debt cycle, lasting 80 years. Almost nobody talks about this. It's not in textbooks. Even central bankers and treasury officials had little to say about it when Dalio asked them directly. Here's how it builds. Each short-term cycle ends with some debt unpaid or restructured. Over decades, total debt grows relative to actual productive capacity. Interest payments consume more and more of income. Eventually, liquid assets can't cover liquid liabilities. Lenders finally refuse to lend more. The train derails. When that happens, governments and central banks face terrible choices, all of them painful. Let me give you an example from ancient history that will sound disturbingly familiar. In 60 BC, Rome was a superpower with a balanced republic, professional army, and expanding empire. But it had massive debts from military campaigns and expansion. By 33 AD, Rome faced a severe credit crisis. The government had revived an old law requiring creditors to invest in Italian land. When enforcement suddenly became strict, creditors rushed to buy land, sparking a liquidity crisis. Credit dried up. The economy froze. Sound familiar? It should. It's exactly what happened in 2008. When suddenly everyone realized the housing market was overvalued. Emperor Tiberius eventually solved Rome's crisis by making vast sums available for interest-free loans. Basically, the central bank stepped in as lender of last resort. Rome survived, but the solution set a precedent. Over the following centuries, Rome repeatedly devalued its currency to pay debts. By the 3rd century, the Roman coin had become practically worthless. They introduced in-kind taxation because nobody trusted the currency anymore. The pattern that destroyed Rome. Spend on military expansion, fund it with debt, devalue currency to pay it back, lose economic vitality, weaken defenses, collapse from within. Julius Caesar himself had dealt with Rome's debt crisis in 49 BC with radical measures. Debt cancellation, land redistribution, currency devaluation. These provided temporary relief, but established dangerous precedents that eventually hollowed out the empire. Now let's jump ahead to a more recent example, one that still haunts German policy today. After World War I, Germany faced enormous reparations payments to the Allies. 50 billion marks added to existing war debts of 156 billion marks. The government had a choice, and they chose wrong. Instead of raising taxes or cutting spending, both politically toxic, they printed money. What happened next was economic apocalypse. In mid-1922, the exchange rate was 320 marks per dollar. By late 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy $1. Think about that. If you had savings in 1922, they were completely worthless by 1923. People had to bring wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread. Workers demanded to be paid twice a day so they could rush out and buy something, anything, before their wages became worthless. Germany faced two unacceptable alternatives. If they stopped inflation, there would be immediate bankruptcies, unemployment, strikes, hunger, violence, and possibly revolution. If they continued inflation, they would default on foreign debt. They tried to avoid both. They got both. The hyperinflation wiped out the German middle class, destroyed faith in government, created desperation, and you know what came next. The Nazis promised stability. In 1923, just 4 years after the Weimar Republic's founding, Adolf Hitler attempted his first coup in Munich. The lesson? When a country loses control of its debt and currency, the economic consequences become political consequences. Democratic institutions collapse. Extremists offer simple solutions. Disaster follows. So where are we now in this 80-year cycle? The last major crisis, World War II and its aftermath, ended around 1945. We're now 80 years into the next cycle, right on schedule. Let's look at the numbers. United States. National debt has surpassed $36 trillion as of late 2024. Federal debt held by the public was 99% of GDP in 2024, projected to reach 116% by 2034 and 172% by 2054 if current trends continue. In 2024, federal interest payments exceeded spending on both Medicare and national defense. The government spends more servicing debt than on national defense. China. National debt around $16.65 trillion in 2024. Local government debt reached 92 trillion yuan, 12.58 trillion, in 2023. Many provincial governments face maturity walls with bonds equal to 40% of outstanding debt due within 5 years. Banks ordered to roll over debts in massive restructuring. The warning signs Dalio identified are flashing everywhere. Liquid liabilities exceed liquid assets. Check. Lenders growing reluctant. Check. Note, China reducing U.S. Treasury holdings from $1.3 trillion to $768 billion. Interest costs consuming larger share of revenue. Check. Government unable to fund spending without more borrowing. Check. Growing political polarization over fiscal policy. Check. We're not just approaching the crisis, we're in it. The train is still moving, but the tracks are bending. When the crisis fully hits, there are only a few options, and all of them hurt. Option 1. Austerity. Cut government spending dramatically. This means slashing social programs, infrastructure investment, everything. It causes immediate economic contraction, unemployment, social unrest. Politically almost impossible in a democracy. Option 2. Raise taxes. Drastically increase taxes to pay down debt. This also contracts the economy, reduces incentives to work and invest, and is political suicide. Voters punish leaders who raise taxes. Option 3. Default. Simply refuse to pay. This destroys your country's credit rating, makes future borrowing impossible or extremely expensive, and causes financial chaos. Very few countries willingly choose this. Option 4. Inflate away the debt. Print money to pay off debts in devalued currency. This is the path Weimar chose. It feels like the easy option until hyperinflation destroys the middle class and the social fabric. Option 5. Beautiful deleveraging. This is Dalio's term for the least bad option, a carefully balanced mix of debt restructuring, modest inflation, some austerity, and economic growth. It requires extraordinary political coordination, competent leadership, and public willingness to accept shared sacrifice. Which option do you think is most likely in our current political environment? Can we escape? History offers some hope. Some nations have escaped the debt trap. Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries emerged from wars with massive debts, but exercised spending restraint and rapidly reduced debt after both American Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. Scandinavian countries in the 1990s, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, faced severe crises after decades of expanding social spending. They achieved political consensus across ideological lines, reformed welfare states, and dramatically reduced debt. Sweden cut its debt to GDP ratio from 70% to under 30%. These reforms still command 80% plus public support. Canada reduced its debt to GDP from 64% in 1997 to 31% in 2016, while the US went the opposite direction. What did they have in common? Political consensus that transcended party lines. Leadership willing to make unpopular decisions. Public understanding that short-term pain was necessary. Focus on spending restraint rather than just tax increases. The question is, do we have the political will, the competent leadership, and the informed citizenry to make similar choices? We stand at a crossroads. We haven't crossed the Rubicon yet, but we can see it from here. The 80-year debt cycle isn't a law of physics. It's a law of human nature. We forget. We overspend. We believe this time is different. We push problems onto future generations. But the cycle is predictable precisely because it's rooted in human nature. And because it's predictable, it's also preventable if we choose to act. The cycle demands one of two things. Either we make hard choices now while we still have options, or math makes harder choices for us later when options have run out. History is screaming at us. Rome is screaming. Weimar is screaming. The 750 currencies that have ceased to exist since 1700 are screaming. The only question is, are we listening? Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. Is the 80-year pattern really that precise? Give or take 25 years, so it's a range of 55 to 105 years. The point isn't the exact number, but that it exceeds one generation's memory and experience. Can't we just grow our way out of debt? Only if growth consistently exceeds interest rates on debt. When debt gets this large relative to GDP, it becomes mathematically difficult. Plus, high debt itself tends to reduce growth by crowding out productive investment. What about modern monetary theory? Can't countries with their own currency just print money? Weimar Germany had its own currency too. So did Zimbabwe. So did Venezuela. Ask them how that worked out. What should individuals do? Understand the risks. Diversify holdings. Avoid being overly exposed to any single currency or government. Consider hard assets. Most importantly, don't assume the government can or will protect you from the consequences.